welcome back to our little RPG tutorial series. In this episode, things get a little more technical because this time we are finally giving the project a proper save system. We will start with a simple save function, connect it to the Campfire, and then build the core logic for new game, save game, and load game. We will also make sure the player can load the game again after dying, because starting from zero every single time would get old pretty fast. So this episode is a big step toward making the project feel much more complete. Let's get started. And now, finally, it's time to save the game. We already set up the variable for collecting mushroom pieces, so let's use that as a starting point for our save system. But of course, that's not the only thing we want to keep. Let's say we also want to save the player's experience points. Sounds useful, right? So we'll create a new variable for experience, and while we're at it, let's add one for the player level 2. We'll keep both of these pretty simple for now, just enough to build our save system. In the next tutorial, we'll go deeper into leveling and maybe even add some new abilities. I'm thinking about ranged attacks, or maybe even some basic magic. Got any cool ideas? Drop them in the comments, I'd love to hear them. Okay, back to coding. In the enemy script, we'll now add experience points that the player gets when defeating an enemy. And then, let's print the variables to check if everything works. As you can see, we're now able to collect experience, and the mushroom pieces are also being tracked correctly. Later on, we'll definitely add some fun animations for those stats. But for now, our goal is this: save the values of both variables, and then load them again after the player dies or restarts the game. Let's get started on that. Alright. Time to turn our Campfire into a real save point. Let's jump into the Campfire script and start by creating the signals we'll need for when the player enters the Campfire's detection zone. We're going to need a function to handle that, but we'll come back to it in just a bit. First, we need to make sure the game recognizes when the player is near the Campfire. We'll do that the usual way, by detecting the body with an on-body entered signal and checking if that body is the player. Simple, clean, and works like a charm. These extra variables will help us control the save process at the Campfire. But now, we also need a way to show the player that this is a place where the game can be saved. For now, we'll keep it really simple. Just some basic text prompts on the screen. Nothing fancy yet. In the next tutorial, we'll work on making this look really nice, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be good. first, let's focus on getting the basic functionality in place. We'll add the text prompts directly into the right functions, so they show up when the player enters the Campfire zone. Next, we need to set up some input actions to let the player confirm or cancel the save. To do that, go into the project settings, open the input settings and create 2 new actions, yes and no. We'll use those in just a moment to trigger the save or skip it. And now we're getting to the heart of the save system. To make this work, we'll create 2 new scripts. These scripts are used exclusively to manage our game data and to perform the saving and loading. Let's start with this one. But before we go any further, we need to change the script type. So what does that mean? We're naming this script so we can reference it like a custom type later on. And by adding extends resource, we're telling Godot that this script is not a node, but a data container. This means we can store variables inside it and even save them to a file, which is exactly what we want for our save system. Alright. Now we'll start listing the variables we want to save. We'll define each one with its data type, like int or bool, and give it a default value for a new game. This way, when a new game starts, the save file will already know what values to use from the beginning. Next, let's move on to the second script, the one that actually handles saving the data to a file. We'll save everything under a standard file path, like this. This tells Godot to save the file in the user's local data folder, so it works on any system. Alright, continuing with the script. Our data script doesn't seem to be recognized right now. Let's take a closer look. Of course. We need to set the data script as global so Godot can find it no matter where we use it. Once that's done, things look much better. Now let's create the actual save function. Just follow along with what I'm doing here. We'll write a simple method to store all the values and save them to the file path we just defined. With the new game function, we tell Godot to reset everything back to its original starting values. So all variables are restored to the default values we defined at the beginning. In our save function, we're going to take the variables from the global script and use them to overwrite the ones in our data script. Why? Because we want to save the current game state. Things like experience points, collected mushrooms, player level, all of that. During gameplay, the variables in our global script get updated, and when we save the game, we transfer those values into our data script. Once the data script has those updated values, we'll write everything into the save file. Now when it comes to loading, we do the exact opposite. We'll read the values from the data script and use them to overwrite the variables in the global script. That way, the game knows what your stats were when you last saved, and everything continues where you left off. Simple, clean, and ready to go. Since we want to use these functions from other scripts as well, this script also needs to be global. So let's head into the project settings and register it as a global script, just like before. Alright, back to the Campfire. Let's update the Campfire functions so that they now trigger the save function when the player confirms the action. Let me take one more quick look at the setup. We can actually simplify a few things here. There we go. Much cleaner now. And of course the classic print check, just to make sure the function runs as expected. Let's test it. Perfect. Everything is working just the way we want. Okay, maybe not completely perfect just yet. Let's take a moment to adjust the UI windows a bit, just to make things look cleaner. Alright, now let's jump into the load system. This part's a bit trickier, because we don't just want to load the variables, we also need to set the player's position back to the last campfire they saved at. let's start simple. We'll display a small text prompt at the start position, just to indicate that the game can be loaded. And yeah, that UI placement behind the trees, not great. Let's fix that too. We'll move the text up into the top layer so it's clearly visible. Oh, and this next step is important. We want to hide the load message if there's no save file yet. Because the first time someone starts the game, there's nothing to load, right? So follow along here. I'll walk you through how to check that. And just like always, I'm sure some of you have a better, smarter solution for this. So drop your ideas in the comments. I'd love to learn from your approaches too. Thanks so much for the support. Over the next few minutes, I'll build up the logic so the system starts working. The variables and structure are mostly self-explanatory, so just follow along with the steps. I'll jump back in once we reach the more important parts. Alright, this part right here is a key moment in our system. We're going to add a feature that automatically checks for a save file every time the game starts. This tiny piece of information is super important because it tells us whether the player should be able to load the game at all. If there's no save file yet, we simply don't show the load option. That way, the game feels clean and smart, no confusing options for the player, and nothing that breaks immersion. Alright, let's do a quick check to see if the game actually detects our saved data. We'll print the variable that tells us whether a save file exists. And yep, there it is. Looks like it's working. Next, let's set the new starting position at the campfire. We don't know the exact X and Y values yet, so let's grab them straight from the camp scene. Alright, we're going to use exactly these values for the new player position after loading. Nice and simple. Now let's just place the player back at the right spot for the scene transition. Once that's done, we can just call the new position when loading the game. Now we just need to make a few adjustments to the logic. Right here, we call the new position, so the player appears at the saved campfire location. And we also make sure that the correct scene is loaded when starting the game. Let's test it real quick. Boom! Looks great. The player now starts at the campfire after loading. Now let's check if the mushroom chunks and the player's experience also load properly. We'll save the game, reload it, and look at the counters. After every load, the game continues tracking the experience and collected items just as we left off. Now let's test what happens when we don't load the game. Yep, everything resets. The counters start from 0. Perfect. And one last load for good measure. The last save was loaded correctly. Everything works as expected. Very nice. Looks like we've run into a nasty little bug. Let's take a closer look. Yep, that's on me. Turns out I said something earlier that wasn't quite right. This script right here, it actually shouldn't be marked as global. My bad. We don't need it to be global. We can still access everything just fine without that. Alright, things are definitely looking better now. Next up, let's add a feature to load the game after the player dies. We already have that cool spirit animation that shows up when the player kicks the bucket. So now we're going to use that moment to display a text prompt. Just like we did earlier at the campfire, we'll let the player know that they can load the game from here. First, we'll go ahead and show the spirit again. Next, we'll create a simple text box to let the player know they can load their last save. It won't be a full dialogue just yet, but don't worry, we'll make it look much better in the next tutorial. Now for the tech part, we'll add a few new variables and tweak the logic so that the load function actually works when triggered here. Just follow along step by step. And as always, feel free to improve the code or try new ideas. If you find a simpler solution, share it in the comments. I'll appreciate it. And so will the whole community. One quick but super important reminder here, variables should never have the same name as functions, so make sure to keep your naming clean and unique. Now, we'll just copy the scene loading logic into place. Nice and simple. With this variable, we'll add all the necessary logic to control what happens after the player dies. Just follow along with the steps here. as always, keep things organized and well structured in your code. It'll save you time later, especially as your project grows. One last thing, let's adjust the Z index of the spirit and the text box so they don't disappear behind the trees. Alright, time for the final test. We've built a lot in this tutorial and now everything we planned should be fully working. And with that, our project now has its first real save system. We added a simple save and load function and connected it to the Campfire. We also made sure the player can load the game properly after dying. So this is a big step toward making the project feel much more complete. In the next episode we will keep pushing things forward. If you want to continue the journey, I will see you in episode 7. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.